pleasure to introduce Dr. Kim Jenkins, and I think they've been in kind of order sequentially that they were in the lab. And COVID wasn't necessary for me to have the times a little confused, but yeah, it was Andrew followed by Jason, followed by Dr. Jenkins. She went from a biochemistry degree at Montana Tech to an NIH IRTA, which is an Interdisciplinary Research Training Award, where she went to the Bethesda campus of the NIH, and later a PhD, AUD in audiology from the University of Maryland. So I'll let you tell her about her journey and her current adventures at Walter Reed.
Thank you. Thank you. So first, I just want to say, you guys are an amazing group of people. I have just been blown away by everything I've heard yesterday and this morning. So I'm really just honored to be here and let you guys listen to, what I have to say. So I'm going to say something completely different than anything you've heard so far. I don't have anything to say about bacteria or phages. I've very tiny bit. So it's going to be a little bit of a different story. So my title, It All Comes Together. I actually was talking to some of my students at work last week and showing this to them, and they were excited. They're students, they like to know things. But my original title was It's All Science. And they were like, oh, Dr. Jenkins, that's so corny, can't do that. So I was peer pressured to change it. But after listening to everything, I was like, man, I should have kept it, because that was the theme of what's going on today. But I am going to talk to you about how, even though I'm in a very different place than I was a very long time ago, everything does come together, and it's just a very incredible journey that I've got to go on. Okay, so I am a employee of the federal government, so whenever I give any kind of a talk, I always have to say it's me talking, and I do not represent the Department of Defense, I don't represent the US government, it's just, coming from me, so. That's that. All right, so back in the day, who was I? Look at me, this young person, who knows? So I went to Montana Tech. I actually spent 2 years in Montana Tech. I started my undergraduate at Carroll. So I did my first 2 years at Carroll, and then I transferred to Tech. And thank goodness that I did, because it's been the most impactful thing that I've ever done on my journey. I went there for a boy, but that doesn't matter. The point is, it gave me a really amazing experience that I've taken with me throughout my life and my career. So my junior year, I transferred to Tech, and I was in the chemistry department. So I had my, feet in two worlds, kind of, because I was a chemistry major, but I did love that biology aspect to it, or the chemistry of living organisms. So I did do that biochemistry option with my degree. I was thinking about going to medical school for the longest time, in high school, in middle school. That was really my driving force up to this point. I wanted to go to medical school. I had a particular interest in neurology. I don't know why, but the biology of the brain was just very fascinating to me, and that physiology. So that was initially what I was doing. I was a phage hunter around 2008, 2009. It was a long time ago, and because I did leave this portion, I don't entirely remember everything, but I do remember being in Marissa's lab a lot and doing all of the things that everybody has really described, right? So we're growing phages, we're running plates, we're doing all of the things. So I was looking at trying to isolate genes that were encoding the lysozymes, and trying to maybe figure out, if we isolated those, can we make some sort of, antibacterial solution or something that would work outside of the phage. I also went to some local K through 12 and did some work with Marissa there. So I did all of that. Like everybody, there were some trials and tribulations. I was never able, I didn't discover a phage, and I was actually never able to get the lysozyme isolated. But that's okay, because I learned a lot about it. And then after I left Montana Tech, I never did any wet lab work again. Never. To this day, I haven't done any. But that's okay. All right, look at me cleaned up. And the white coat, people have been talking about it. I don't actually wear that at work every day. This was just for the picture. But now I'm a clinical audiologist at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I'm sure a few people know what an audiologist, but in general, do people know what an audiologist is? Okay, so I'm a doctor of hearing and balance disorders. So anybody who has issues with their communication in any kind of way, or any kind of vestibular or balance issues, they're gonna come and see me. They're gonna come and see the ear, nose, and throat doctor. We're gonna help those patients out. And I work at Walter Reed, so that is the flagship hospital of the military. In Bethesda, it used to be in DC, and in 2015 there was the BRAC, where it was Army Medical Center, and then it moved to Bethesda to become Walter Reed Walter Reed Hospital, and it's the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. So anybody who has any kind of issues in the military that can't be treated at their local military treatment facilities, which are significantly smaller, they're sent to Walter Reed. So we're really like the specialists of the military. So I work in the audiology lab there, our audiology clinic. I am the auditory processing disorders subject matter expert. So these are the people that come in and they get their hearing tested, and you say, you know what, you're good to go. Your hearing looks great. The patient's like, are you sure? Because I'm really having a lot of difficulty in whatever environment I'm in, or I feel like I'm struggling. I'm just not hearing the way that I used to. And, just your standard clinician can't really explain that. So that's where I come in. And I start to look at these things, and I look at more the neural pathways and what things are going on in the brain, and how is the brain interacting with a lot of those auditory signals that they're getting. So first, it all comes back around. Neurology, back again. I do a lot of low gain hearing aids. So this is people who have quote unquote normal hearing. I fit them with hearing aids. That is definitely not something that is standard practice right now, so I'm doing something a little out of the box with my patients and getting great success, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm our hearing aid program manager, so audiology, we work with hearing aids. That's just what we have to do. That's what helps our patients the most. And in our clinic, we have a large clinic. We have an 8 audiologist clinic. We have a lab that has 2 technicians. It's supposed to be a 12-person clinic, so the 8 of us are trying to pick up that load from 12, from what we should have with 12. But I make sure that all of the hearing aids that we come in, all of the manufacturers, we do all the trainings, I know what technology we're having, and I make sure that our audiologists have what they need. I'm a virtual health provider with the Pentagon Clinic, so at Walter Reed, we see mainly patients who are active duty military, so they are currently serving in the military. We do see some veterans. I don't personally, but some people do. But some of our, higher up patients at the Pentagon, our 2, 3, 4-star generals, it's hard for them to leave the Pentagon and come up to Bethesda. It's like 10 miles, but with the traffic, that's like an hour and a half drive. So it can be kind of daunting, and it's kind of difficult for some of our quote unquote VIP patients. So we have developed, not me personally, but my colleague developed a program where I'm sitting in my office and there's a tech at the Pentagon, and I remote in, I do all of my testing, I do all of my hearing aid fitting, I do everything from afar. So these patients can do their very important jobs of protecting us and not taking, a half a day out just to come and see me. So I'm one of 2 of those providers. I do inpatient triage, so all of our patients that are like in combat, if they get hurt or anything like that, they're typically sent, especially if they are abroad, they're sent to the military hospital in Germany, and then once they're deemed safe, they are then transported to Walter Reed. Part of that process of them being able to be discharged from Walter Reed is they have to go through what's called the combat protocol. So there are a number of different disciplines that need to evaluate that patient to see if they're clear and okay to go, or if they need further evaluation, because a lot of things happen when you're out on the battlefield. And if you have things like head injuries, well, your ear is on your head, and that's going to cause potentially some pretty big issues with your hearing. So I'm part of that inpatient triage team. If need be, I'll take my audiology equipment, wheel it up to the inpatient clinic, and do hearing test bedside. Very quick and dirty, but just to make sure, does this patient need more care? There's also, within our clinic, there's 3 different components. There's the audiology clinic, there's the speech pathology clinic, and there's our research clinic. I actually started out, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, but I did start out in the research clinic, and then I moved over to the audiology clinic. But I work a lot, I do a lot of research with our research clinic, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I also am an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, so I work with their audiology department there. I work with a bridge program, so students who maybe are going back to school after a number of years or have a degree in one discipline, but they've decided for whatever reason they want to go into audiology or speech pathology, there's some prerequisites that need to be done for them. So Maryland has provided this bridge program, something that would have been nice when I was around, but it's fine. They provided this program so those students have the opportunity to come and take some of these credits. So I'm a professor with that. I intermittently also teach the grad classes if somebody's on sabbatical or something like that. So intermittently I will teach grad classes also, but I mainly teach undergraduate audiology classes at the University of Maryland. So I do a lot of things, have a lot of hats, busy a lot, that's okay. My most important job, I'm a cat mom. So these are my babies. They wanted to come with me. They were really upset when I wouldn't let them, but that's okay. I'll see them tomorrow. All right, so that's different, right? In Marissa's lab, doing a whole bunch of stuff with these bacteria and phages, and now ears, right? Doing a whole bunch of things, but nothing to do with one another. Well, maybe. When I was first asked, I was very excited to come and give this talk, but then I was sitting thinking about it. I was like, what am I going to say? I have no idea. Like, I don't really do any of this stuff. But that doesn't necessarily matter, because I do in a roundabout way. And, you know, with reflection and everything, I brought it all together. So let's talk about it a little bit. All right, so careers are a journey. Just like life, everything is a journey, and mine was no different. There were some bumps along the way. There were a lot of twists and turns. A lot of times I had no idea what I was doing, but I'm really happy. And honestly, if somebody told me I couldn't be an audiologist anymore, I would probably just break down and cry, go into a corner, because I wouldn't know what to do with my life. I would not physically be able to do anything other than be an audiologist. So I'm really glad with everything that I've been able to do so far in my career. So like I said, when I was in high school and all through undergrad, that was the plan. I'm gonna go to medical school. I'm gonna do this, it's gonna be great. The time comes when you have to take the MCAT. So everybody who's going to medical school, they have to take the test that's going to allow you to get into medical school, right? So that wasn't fun. I didn't study very much. I had no drive. I took it and I did okay. I probably could have gotten into some school, maybe not the best school, but it wasn't a great score. I sat down to take it again, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and I remember sitting down in my dining room. I had all of my books and everything, and I have my computer, and I'm just waiting, it's like, what am I doing? I don't want to do this. Like, I don't even have the drive to study to start. I can't even do the thing that I need to do the thing to get into medical school. So maybe this isn't for me. So I talked to my parents a little bit, and then, you know, we've all praised her this time we've been here. I went and talked to Marissa, because I was working in her lab. And, you know, I told her, I was like, well, maybe I don't want to go to medical school. Tell me about getting your PhD. What does that mean? What is that like? And you all know, you've interacted with her. She's amazing. So we had a great discussion. She told me about, you know, what it means to get your PhD. You're essentially learning how to learn, and you're coming up with ways, you're figuring out what the problems are in life, and then you're going to figure out a way to kind of solve it. So she told me, this was my senior year, and at this point I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life. She told me about the internship program at NIH. So it is the URTA program, and essentially it is a post-baccalaureate program where you go to NIH and do 1 to 3 years of research in a lab and use that as a springboard to getting into grad school. So I applied, and my plan was to apply, and I actually put on my application, I was only interested in the Montana campus. I didn't want to go to Bethesda. I didn't want to move across the country to the East Coast. I was from Montana, and that's where I wanted to stay. So I put in my application. I didn't really hear from anybody. I reached out to a couple people at the labs in Montana, and they didn't really have any positions. So I was a little bit kind of down. But I got an email one day from this researcher who saw my resume on their listserv, and they had a position in a schizophrenia lab on the Bethesda campus. And when he was like, well, we could do a phone interview, and I was like, oh, well, what else am I doing? No, I can do the interview in person, that's fine. I went to Maryland, spent a couple days, I did the interview. I'm from Billings, which by Montana standards, I'm a big city girl, right? My parents grew up in teeny tiny towns, but myself and my siblings, we grew up in Billings. But when I went to Maryland for those couple days during my internship, it was an entirely different experience. I was crying. I told my boyfriend, I can't live here. This isn't for me. They're so mean. There's so many people walking around. And I got home. I had an email. I got the job. I was like, well, I guess I'm going to Maryland. So I reached out to a couple people. I got the URTA program has a lot of people. So I reached out to other URTAs. I got some housing, packed 2 bags, left. Right? I got there May 2009, and I moved across the country to do this job. Somebody I didn't know picked me up from the airport, brought me to a place that I'd never even looked at before, and I stayed in a basement room on like a mattress, but it was right across the street from NIH, so I got to walk there, and it's beautiful. Maryland is very beautiful and green, and I was just blown away how different it looked from Montana. So I started doing my work. It wasn't like I expected, and it definitely wasn't an experience I had had in Marissa's lab. My mentor was a dual citizenship, Italy and the United States, and he had just gotten a lab in Italy, so he was gone a lot, setting things up. So I was doing some work, but it was mainly busy work. I didn't always understand what I was doing, and I really didn't have good guidance. So this is a good example of what a good mentor can do for you, because I kind of fizzled out with PhD at this point. I wasn't really happy with what I was doing. I was working with mice and doing behavioral studies, so a lot of my day, when I would go into the mice lab, go into a cage, and I would hold mice in my hands. Move them around, get them comfortable with me. The mice who had not had any human experience, that was scary because they would jump all over you and sometimes jump out of their cages and under the ground, and I had to crawl around and grab them. So it wasn't really as I expected. I didn't love it. So now I was at another crossroads. What am I going to do with my life? I have to do something. So I was thinking about things, doing a little research. Well, maybe I can be a PA. So what do I need to do that? I'm looking it up, and you need a certain number of student hours just to apply, patient hours just to apply. And I didn't have any of that. So I was like, well, how can I get this? I actually took a 6-month program to become a CNA to do some work. I didn't use that at all, but it was interesting to have that certificate. But I was applying for jobs, and there was a job in an ENT practice for a medical assistant. And so I applied for the job. I didn't get it, but somebody from the office called me and said, somebody internally is going to move into that position, but we like you. We want you to come work for us. We have a position in the audiology clinic. And it was essentially a receptionist. Why don't you apply for that? And we get turnaround all the time, so it would be easy for you to move into a medical assistant position in the near future. I said, okay, that sounds good. I went to the interview for the audiology position, and it was fine. At the end, my then boss told me, who knows, maybe someday you'll be an audiologist. You know what I thought? That's never happening. Not going to do it. But I took the position, and I was mainly a receptionist answering phones, working a little bit with patients. One of the audiologists kind of, befriended me, took me under her wing, and she realized, oh, Kim's actually really smart. Maybe we should be utilizing her talents in another way. So I took a year and did an online program to become an audiology assistant, so I could do this work in the clinic, do small things, just very quick hearing tests, work on people's hearing aids, educate patients on counseling, those kinds of things. And I fell in love with audiology. It was just such a wonderful experience working with those patients and having this realization about communication that I just didn't understand before and how important it was for all of us. So I decided I was going to become an audiologist. So I applied to grad school. I actually only applied to one school. I applied to UMD. It was a very competitive program, and in my third year, I actually found out that they almost didn't accept me. I was like teetering, and I don't know how I got in, but I did, but thank goodness I did, which is wonderful because that added to my journey. So UMD is a really competitive program. It's very clinical, but it's also very heavy with research. So right away, research was something that I was exposed to as a clinician and how you can utilize research within your clinical practice. So I was working in a lab with Dr. Samir Anderson on essentially how does the brain respond to different sounds. So doing all of this electrophysiology work. So got through the program, definitely some tears. And at this point, I had been 3 years out of school. So going back to grad school, 3 years doesn't seem like a lot, but it seemed like a lot to me. And I seemed so much older than my classmates. I remember I was sitting in lab one time and we were working and I was sitting and I was like, man, my back hurts. My classmate turned to me, she's like, Kim, you're so old. Like, who has a backache when you're sitting? I was like, well, I do. But I graduated and everything worked out. And then I had to figure out, okay, what am I gonna do now as a new audiologist? So the audiology degree is a 4-year degree, 3 years of schooling plus clinical rotations. And then your 4th year is a clinical externship where you're doing nothing but working out in the field all day, every day. So the practice that I did my 4th year with had a position open, so I took it. And so when you're working in an ENT practice, you're mainly there to assist the ENT with what they need to do with their patients. So the patients would come in, they'd see the ENT. I do a lot of diagnostics and treatment for hearing imbalance. So a lot of hearing tests, a lot of balance tests, those kinds of things. You're doing the same thing every day. And when you have these tricky patients, so the patients that come in and say, oh, I'm having all of these difficulties, I have this, this, and this with my hearing, it's like, well, you have normal hearing and I don't know how to help you. That was really hard for me. I didn't like that. And I wanted to do a little bit more. So actually at the University of Maryland, they were looking for a research audiologist. So I applied. And my mentor, who was one of the 3 people on the committee for the job committee, she was like, oh, we're gonna hire you. There's no way we're not gonna hire you. I did the interview. I got an email the next day. They had chosen somebody else. So I was really sad about that. But then about a half an hour later, I got an email from somebody at Walter Reed looking for a research audiologist with my specific skill set. So I started working as electrophysiological research audiologist. So I was looking at different brain patterns with how sounds integrate with the brain and how that impacts people's communication. So I did a lot of things with research. I was looking at those questions that are trying to help manage the tricky patients, but I wasn't actually seeing the tricky patients, and that was hard for me. So I love working with my patients. So at one point, Walter Reed had 4 positions open in their clinic, and I applied. My boss in the research department was very upset, but that's okay, he's okay. And I got it. So now I have the best of both worlds. I work in the clinic, but I still use the things that I'm doing in the clinic. I find problems and I go to the research department and say, hey, I'm seeing this with my patients. What can we do? Let's do a study. And I have multiple studies that are going right now for these patients. So at Walter Reed, I'm doing phenomenal things. Okay. And I get to do so many things, and it's wonderful, and I love it. So I just want to very quickly talk about 2 of the major things that I'm doing at Walter Reed that I'm really proud of. So first and foremost, because I do work in auditory processing disorders, quote unquote, because I actually don't believe it's a thing in my patient population, and I tell everybody who says that, and I'm on like these APD working groups, and I work with all of these, people who believe in APD. I'm like, well, I don't really think that's a thing. I don't think it's what's going on. And people's minds are just blown away. Like, what do you mean? You're like the top SME in the National Capital Region. What do you mean you don't believe in it? I was like, well, I don't. So it's a very interesting conversation to have with patients, or not with patients, with colleagues. But working with this particular patient population, so working at Walter Reed is really tough because it's not our older patients who are coming in who have age-related hearing loss. These are our patients that have been beat up. So they are constantly around noise, whether it's, just moderate amounts of noise all day, every day, or they have concussive events, loud blast exposures, things like that. They have a number of comorbidities, so usually they have some kind of mental health, whether it's PTSD, stress, anxiety. A lot of them have sleep issues, so they're getting 5 hours or less of restless sleep. They're in chronic pain because they're musculoskeletal injuries that they've experienced over wear and tear, or if they've had injuries in the field. I work very closely with our traumatic brain injury department, or not department, we have a whole building. So the military was endowed these funds specifically for patients who have traumatic brain injury to go in and get the specialized care that they need. So these are the patients that I'm working with, and these are the patients that typically are the ones who come to me after years of going through the military. Depending on which branch you're in, you're going to get your hearing tested every year because they want to monitor it. They want to make sure that you're, fit for duty, right? That's a big thing within the military, is being fit for duty. So these patients who've gone through their hearing screenings every year, they come and they see me, and they're telling me every year, they say my hearing is normal, but I am not hearing the way I'm supposed to. Most of the time, these people are very frustrated by the time they get to me. They don't really know what to do, and a lot of times they think they're crazy. And so thinking about this, so I always think about, just foundationally, whether, all parts of science have some kind of foundation. Well, within audiology, we have evidence-based practice. So do things that are shown to be okay evidence, like in the research. And patient-centered care. And this patient-centered care component is very different from our medical model. So a patient doesn't come in, we say you're gonna do this, this, and this, come back and see me later. That is not how audiology works. We sit down, we figure out what's going on with the patient, each individual patient, and we make some sort of treatment plan to help that individual. So that is patient-centered care. And that is critically important for this patient population. While I was doing research, this was the population that I was looking at. And while I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, we're doing all of these tests, like we're trying to develop all of these tests to figure out what's going on with these patients, and they do normal on everything. So not just our standard tests, but all of these crazy tests that we develop just to see, and it's like, well, their auditory systems are working the way they're supposed to. But with audiology and with communication, your ears are not the only thing that is happening, right? They're not the only thing that are working to help that patient communicate in all of the adverse listening environments that they're in. And so with my electrophys background and thinking about this particular patient population, well, if you think about it, their heads essentially are like getting knocked around a lot. Whether it's acoustic events or explosions, wear and tear, all of these things, their brain chemistry is changing. So I wanted to look at that. And what we found was that patients who, whether or not they've been blast exposed or not, patients who say they have more significant difficulties hearing, especially in complex environments like background noise or this like echoing, those kinds of things without visual cues, the patients who say they have more difficulty than the patients who don't, their brains are more active. Their neurons are firing when they're not supposed to be firing. And if you're in an environment where there's background noise and your neurons are just firing, it's going to have significantly negative impacts on your communication ability. And I was actually able to show this with my electrophysiological results. We put electrodes on people, we played them some sounds, and we saw, oh, how are your brains working? When they were getting the sound, their brains worked similarly. Those neurons weren't quite as strong as the people who didn't have issues with their hearing, but when they were at rest, their brains were so much more active than those people who don't have difficulty. So this is like, nobody had ever found this before. And I actually presented this right before I moved over to the clinic. And my research boss at the time was like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Like, you found this like big, amazing thing that like we've been for years looking at quote unquote hidden hearing loss. Nobody could figure it out. And look at what you've done. You've found that these brains are doing crazy things. So that was one big contribution. And now I've fit these patients with hearing aids, which is not standard of care, it's not standard protocol, and I get a lot of pushback. How can you be fitting somebody when they don't have hearing loss? Well, I know it's helping. It helps my patients in a number of different ways. One, it's validating their concerns. And really, we only have hearing aids to work with within audiology, depending on the amount of hearing loss. But we only have hearing aids. So we may as well help them improve their signals that they're getting incoming. Cognitive load issues are a big thing with communication. So if your brain is doing so much, those hearing aids are actually helping, so it doesn't have to work quite as hard. So that's my big contribution to audiology right now in terms of just diagnostics and things. So I'm currently actually working on a new project. I said, hey, everybody's telling me I shouldn't be fitting these hearing aids, and I want to prove them wrong. Let's do a study. So I'm doing a study, some bumps, but we are looking at the impact of these low gain hearing aids and what is it doing to the brain physiology of our patients. So that's one thing. The other thing, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'll just be very quick. Hearing aids in the military are a very interesting problem because the military is our intelligence community, right? It's the skeleton of our intelligence community. And we have people who work in secure locations, secure environments, these places where technology is highly regulated. Some of the technology within hearing aids are not allowed within these environments. So we have a patient population, or we did when I first came to Walter Reed, a patient population that wasn't being adequately served because they would go to their work and their work would say, you can't wear those in here. You got to take them off. And I was not okay with this. And this isn't something that you experience in the civilian world. So really that patient-centered care comes back into play because you got to look at your patient population. So I started to, figure out, okay, how do I deal with this problem? Because I have some patients say, oh, they can't wear these hearing aids. But, oh, it seems like these ones are fine. So at first it was just kind of like randomly figuring out what's happening. But then I was getting more and more patients because the hearing aids I really liked, turns out they're really unsafe for these places like the NSA and the CIA and the FBI. So all of my patients kept coming back to me saying, oh, I can't wear them at work. It's like, well, I'm not okay with that. So finally, I'm just very lucky. My persistence helped, but I also had a little luck. A patient came to me and said, I really like these hearing aids and I need to wear them at work. They are helping me. I need to be able to wear them at work. This is my security officer, so the people who deem what can go into these facilities and what can't. Can you call them? Can you talk to them for me? Sure, I would love to. And it was the NSA. So I called the NSA, talked to somebody, and I got some information about, what is the problem? Why can't these come in? What's the issue with these hearing aids? Got some answers, wasn't quite happy. I ended up getting this patient a different set of hearing aids that she thought was okay, but not as good as the one she had before. So I didn't like this, so I kept calling the NSA. And I kept calling them until I got the boss of the security office. And he was very happy to talk to me because we have laws like the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and employers are not really allowed to prevent you from doing these things at work and being able to address your health concerns in a workplace environment. So he was happy to hear from me because he was encountering more and more these devices that were problematic to these secure environments, and he didn't know how to deal with it because the industry wouldn't talk to him. Like, he's not an audiologist buying a hearing aid. They're not going to tell him what's going on. They don't believe that he's from the NSA. So he got nowhere. But he's like, I'm not an audiologist, so I don't know how to work this problem. And I'm like, guess what? I'm an audiologist, and I can talk to them. So together, he told me what the issues were with the hearing aids, what features, and it was actually just one very small feature that was new to the market coming out. And so I took this back to the hearing aid manufacturers, all the ones that we work with in the government. And one hearing aid manufacturer was like, okay, we'll help you with this. Like, we'll develop something. And that's actually huge because these hearing aid manufacturers have their plan of what they're going to do decades out, right? It's not like they know what they're doing the next year or so. They have a plan decades out. So for them to stop what they're doing, refocus, and make some other device for me that I can then use with this patient population is really very exciting. And then once that happened, after about a year or so, with the world that we now live in with technology, and we're seeing all of these cyber attacks and things, they're becoming more important. The hearing aid manufacturers are realizing, oh, this is a big deal. And it's not going to just help the military, it does help our civilian, because the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, those are all civilians working there. Military's there too, but it's a lot of our civilian sector. So with the collaboration with the NSA, we were able to get products out on the market for everybody. That's going to help patients who work in these environments, because this feature actually came out, it was only in one hearing aid, the one I loved, but it wasn't in the others, but then 2 years later it was in all of them. So within the DoD, we are limited with our options. So all of our options, none of them were going to be allowed within the NSA, and that's a big deal. We can't have that. So luckily I was able to get that collaboration and get that work going, and so that's an ongoing thing because the intelligence community doesn't like to talk to one another. So the NSA doesn't talk to the CIA, doesn't talk to the FBI, doesn't talk to the military. So it's a lot of wrangling cats, essentially. But now there's options, really good options for these patients. All because I was persistent. So just, we don't toot our own horns enough, but this is something that I'm really proud of. So I just want to share that with you guys. So how did the phages influence me? So I'm not doing the same thing you guys are doing. I'm doing something very different, but I'm also doing the exact same thing as you guys at the same time. I've been through a lot. I've been resilient. I've learned how to learn, figuring out the problems and then figuring out how to use them. Use what we find in the research to guide me as a clinician. Status quo, never the answer, and it should never be our goal, and we should always be pushing to push our field forward, no matter what field we're in. And then outreach is critical for all science. So I didn't really talk about teaching, but teaching is also a very big passion of mine. I love my teaching. It adds a tremendous amount of work to my day, but it's the most important thing that I do, I think. So all of you teachers are just a huge inspiration to me, what you're doing. So the bottom line, your foundation is going to guide you where you're meant to be, wherever that is. So where you start is really important. And the Phages program was just amazing for me. That's it. So thank you all.
Questions? Okay. That's okay. It's very different.
I think a lot of people are lucky that you were there to